Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Senate Education. It is February 17th, 2:35. Let me just give everyone, do a little housekeeping first. Committee chairs met just last evening, and the date for crossover is still in the works. It's not yet been set, but it will either be March 12th or the 19th. And I think the pro tem is assessing when it looks like, we may wrap up, et cetera. So those who are starting to just think about, end of session kinds of things and timing, I would recommend people check in with the pro tem's office. But either way, it gives us about another few weeks, 2 weeks exactly, with town meeting week being a week away, to get any bills out before crossover. The pro tem has asked each chair to provide a list of likely bills that will be finished before crossover. Whether or not they're on the floor before we go is another thing. Some may end up in money committees. For new senators, just know money committees are given an extra week before bills have to leave their committees. So if we have, for example, a March 12th crossover date for policy committees, finance and appropriations, and I believe institutions also would be included in that, would have a March 19th date to make crossover. And so what I have reported to the pro tem's office is I mentioned that we will likely have a school discipline bill, school discipline advisory council bill. We will likely have a literacy committee bill. We will have our letter to appropriations outlining these expedited finances voted out likely, hopefully on Friday. And then we'll also have a miscellaneous education bill that will probably will incorporate what the agency is hoping, the administration is hoping that we'll consider today, as well as I would think that that's where we will put our library work, our cultural liaison work, and our act relating to school wellness and feminine hygiene work. If people are looking for something else, or if they're looking for a different path for a piece of legislation, please let me know, and we will accommodate as best we can. The bill that we're taking up today, S75, depending on committee's positions, could be either, may also be something we push to get over the crossover line. It may be something that we attach to our other literacy work, or it may be something that we attach to something that is coming our way from the House, or it's something that we would look at getting out next winter. After we take up S75, we'll look at the miscellaneous ed bill suggestions from the Agency of Education. And then we will return to our work on COVID-19 education related needs. And that, in short order, will be the work for the day. And as for COVID-19 educational needs, this is returned to our appropriations request that Jim has been working on and that we've all been working on, and appropriations would like us to sign on the dotted line, hopefully by the end of this week. So with that, I would like to turn the floor over to Senator Terenzini. Senator Terenzini introduced S75, an act relating to screening students for dyslexia. Senator Terenzini, if you would be so kind as to just give us, why you put the bill in, a little bit about what it does, and then we'll turn it over to Leg Council for a more formal walkthrough.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Campion. I appreciate it. Really, this idea was, I believe, brought to all of us in the committee, and I took the lead on it from one of our witnesses, Doreen Dorfman, who I see there in the center of my screen. It really perked my interest from the information that Doreen had sent over. It was something that I almost would have just assumed that we had in place already to screen for the markers of dyslexia. And yet to learn that there's so many other states that do it, and Vermont wasn't one of them. So I was compelled to attach my name to this and and work with Jim and you, Senator Campion, to get this bill put together in short order. And I'm glad to see that Doreen is here as one of our witnesses, because I look forward to hearing what she has to provide. And of course, I look forward to hearing the good work of Jim Demarais. So that's pretty much the introduction, Senator Campion, and
Great.
I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's very helpful. We have all been contacted, and I appreciate Senator Terenzini's leadership on this. I would mention before Mr. Demarais takes us through for our witnesses, something to think about is, already this bill in some ways has come up. And by that, I mean, when we've talked about literacy, there have been, some of our witnesses have talked about why moving in this direction isn't a good idea. A feeling of attaching, a stigma to a student all the way through their academic career, starting at such a young age. And then I've also heard from constituents who have felt as though their children have had to do catch up because they didn't have this sort of testing, early on. So something for you all to be thinking about as our Ledge Council takes us through the bill. With that, Jim, always a pleasure. Glad you're here.
Glad to be here. So does everyone have access to the bill, or should I try to bring it up?
I believe we all have access to the bill, and not unless I see someone who would like to see it up, we will go ahead and follow along on our iPads and computers.
Okay.
Thanks.
So for the record, Jim Demarais, Ledge Council, we're walking through S75, which is an act relating to screening students for dyslexia. The bill starts with, it's adding a new chapter to Title 16, and that is entitled Dyslexia Screening. And there are a few definitions to begin with. The first is of dyslexia itself, which means a specific learning disability that is neurological in origin, characterized by difficulties with accurate or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities, that typically results from a deficit in the phonological component of language, and that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. And then there's a definition of evidence-based methods of instruction, which, as we'll come on to, is used for students who have been identified as having dyslexia. So this method of instruction consists of specialized reading, writing, and spelling instruction that is multisensory in nature, equipping students to simultaneously use multiple senses in vision, hearing, touch, and movement. Evidence-based methods of instruction employ direct instruction of systematic and cumulative objectives, with the sequence beginning with the student's easiest and most basic elements and progressing methodically to more difficult material, as indicated by systematic progress monitoring. Each step is built on those steps previously learned. Components of evidence-based methods of instruction include instruction targeting phonological awareness, sound symbol association, syllable structure, morphology, syntax, and semantics. Okay, so now we're moving on to subsection B, line 14, which is the early screening for markers of dyslexia. And it says, students enrolled in public schools in Vermont shall be screened for markers of dyslexia first during the fall semester of kindergarten and first grade, and during the spring semester of kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and third grade, if a student does not meet the expected literacy standards for those grades. And then it goes on, section 2 says, in addition, a student at any grade level, K through 12, shall be screened for markers of dyslexia upon the request of the student's parent, guardian, teacher, counselor, or school psychologist to determine if the student would benefit from intervention within the school's multi-tier systems of support. And then C goes on to what happens when students are identified with markers of dyslexia. It says if a student is identified as having these markers, the school shall notify the school's parent or guardian, provide the student's parent or guardian with information and resource material about dyslexia, provide the student with appropriate evidence-based methods of instruction, which brings us back to the definition we went through at the beginning. For monitor and subject to state and federal privacy laws, report the student's progress to the parent or guardian and all involved parties. And D is notification requirement, which requires public schools at the beginning of each school year to notify all parents or guardians of enrolled students or if relevant to grades offered by the school, the required screenings and the screenings that may be requested under subsection B. So those are the screenings for both students in the early years, and then at request of older students. So they have to be informed about that. And the school's duties to address dyslexia, which is how they would address dyslexia if identified under subsection C. And then that notification may be included with other information provided by the school to parents or guardians to students at the beginning of the school year. And the act shall take effect on July 1 of this year.
Thank you. Committee, any questions before we move to our witnesses? Dr. Dorfman, you are on my schedule first. Does that work for you? Great. And so what I'd like to do is give, it looks like we have 3 witnesses on this issue. I don't see Ms. Lovejoy here yet, but if you could plan your testimony for about 15 minutes each, including a time for a couple of questions. And Dr. Dorfman, if I may, in your kickoff, if you will, tell us what dyslexia is.
Sure. I'll just start by saying that Brittany Lovejoy couldn't join us because of a family emergency. So Brenda and I are here instead. Brittany would like to attend in the future to provide testimony. But to get to your question, I'll just speak off the top of my head. The International Dyslexia Association has a widely accepted definition of dyslexia, but it is a condition that is neurobiological in origin, and there is no cure. Between 5 to 17% of students have can be diagnosed with dyslexia, and it is characterized by difficulty with language from early needs that would be observed by a speech language pathologist with phonological and phonemic problems, through reading and reading comprehension, spelling, vocabulary development, reading fluency, and since there is no cure, but instead the student requires extensive instruction over their years of schooling, that as the literacy expectations increase, text gets longer and more complex, they need corresponding instruction alongside. So, but I'll get into that a little bit more as well, Brenda, when we present. Is that helpful?
It is.
Okay. All right. Shall I begin with what I had prepared?
Please. Why don't you introduce yourself and for the record and take it away.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Doreen Dorfman. I live in Waterbury Center. Thank you, senators, for inviting us today about S75, an act relating to screening students for dyslexia.
I'm sorry, Dr. Dorfman, if I may, you're a school administrator where?
I'm actually coming as a private citizen.
Okay.
So I've worked in a number of schools over the last 25 years.
Okay. Terrific, thank you.
Okay. I would like to explain the importance of this bill and its positive impact on students learning to read well. As I said, this is my 25th year working in schools in Vermont as a teacher and administrator. Over this time, I served many children and teens who could hardly read. This was not obvious at first. The students were insightful and eloquent, but when asked to read aloud or explain what they had read, they could not. Sometimes they'd start crying. Other times they admitted, "I don't understand what I read." This drove me to dive deep into reading research and enroll in the Reading Institute at Bay Path University and pursue the education specialist degree in reading and literacy instruction, despite having already completed a doctorate in education at UVM and a Fulbright scholarship. S75 is extremely important for Vermont's students and schools. Screening for the markers of dyslexia using evidence-based tools, such as those recommended in the 4 Pillars of Reading Success, an action guide for states, published last June by the National Council on Teacher Quality, will not only identify and benefit students with dyslexia, but also students who are below proficient and who need effective instruction. As stated in S75, these markers include phonological deficits, including difficulty with recognizing and manipulating speech sounds, retrieving words, and rhyming. Markers of dyslexia also include difficulties with reading and spelling words. From first grade through high school, screening also targets reading comprehension, vocabulary knowledge, and fluency. S75 stipulates evidence-based methods that consist of specialized reading, writing, and spelling instruction that is multisensory. Evidence-based is the gold standard of research, in which independent experts conduct rigorous, objective, and scientific review to verify the research methods and outcomes. Students with the markers of dyslexia will receive direct and systematic instruction that is cumulative, so they practice their increasing knowledge and skills over time to attain grade level literacy. S75 rightly articulates that each step is built on those previously learned. On this foundation, students with the markers of dyslexia will receive appropriate education before or if they fall behind. S75 lists the key evidence-based methods of instruction. These include phonological awareness is the metacognitive awareness of the speech sound system, fundamental for literacy. Students distinguish subtle sound differences like short I and short E, and and become agile in phoneme manipulation, such as being able to say pit to pet to bet to bat to mat to mush. Students learn to recognize and create their own rhymes, nickel, pickle, tickle, and alliteration, 3, throw, through. For some students, this comes absolutely automatically. Other students need the evidence-based instruction described in S75 to achieve this early level of automaticity and master the 44 speech sounds produced by the 26 letters of our alphabet. Number 2, sound symbol association. 50% of the English language is spelled by direct sound symbol correspondence, and another 36% can be spelled accurately except for one speech sound, usually a vowel, such as the word said, in which AI is irregular. Students with markers of dyslexia especially struggle with spelling. Here, S75 will make a substantial improvement in their learning. Number 3, syllable structure. Our English language of over 600,000 words have only 6 syllable types. When poor readers are directly taught to recognize each type, such as the silent E syllable, like dome and fame, and the consonant LE syllable, steeple, uncle, they gain a very powerful strategy for reading and spelling words correctly. Morphology. When students learn morphemes, which are the smallest units of meaning in words, their vocabulary and comprehension grows exponentially. Students with the markers of dyslexia need the direct instruction in which they learn that, for example, the prefix con in consensus means with, the root struct and construct means build. The suffix shun in nation means the act or condition of. With direct instruction in morphology, including our Anglo-Saxon bases, Latin roots, and Greek forms, students dramatically increase their vocabulary and thereby improve their comprehension. They also learn to create word webs and experience how words move from noun to verb to adjective and to adverb, such as dog to dog, dogged, and doggedly. Syntax. Syntax is the rule system of sentence structure. Knowing vocabulary is not enough. Poor understanding and use of syntax is another marker of dyslexia. Syntax improves reading comprehension and writing, especially moving up through the grades when text becomes more complex. Number 6, and lastly, semantics. Semantics is the meaning of words within a context. For example, bat the ball is very different in meaning than the actor batted her eyelashes. Semantic instruction is essential to educate students with the markers of dyslexia. This includes vocabulary, inferencing, and making meaning of text. Another benefit of S75 is early screening and instruction. Students' brains absorb the foundations of English from kindergarten to second grade like no other time. You've probably heard how natural and easy it is for children this age to pick up other languages. After a short time immersed in another country, they can chat up a storm. The same phenomenon happens in our English language. For students without dyslexia markers, the brain only needs 1 to 4 exposures to learn new and spell new words. But struggling students may need 12 to 20 instructional exposures to achieve the same learning. Like evidence-based instruction, screening and assessments must be scientifically validated and reliable. This means other evidence-based assessments arrive at the same results. An unreliable screener only measures progress in a reading program with results that do not correspond with external measures. In contrast, in my graduate program at the Reading Institute, I assessed students with the Letters Reading and Spelling Screener and the Gallistel-Ellis Reading and Spelling Screener. The results were identical, and I, as their teacher, found what the students already knew and what I needed to teach. In grades K through 2, we want to ensure that the structure of English becomes accurately mapped in their brains. When you can automatically say, read, write, and spell a word, then the word has been permanently mapped. You will never forget the word. Upon sight, you cannot unsee the word. With ease, you can include the word while writing. Your eyes are the conduit for the 4 parts of the brain developed to form robust neural connections, working in microseconds to access the meaning stored. It's why your brain instantly knows the difference between receive and receipt. This recognition is automatic, unconscious, and actually delightful. All students deserve instruction to master the skills that all literate adults take for granted and use every day. Language learned is neurologically mapped to the brain, as I have said, but including errors. It can take weeks to months of intensive remediation to correct these errors. This is expensive and time-consuming and may require students, particularly older students, to miss other school activities. But the research is clear. Accommodations and modifications are never a substitute for remediation. Students with severe reading deficits may need up to 2 hours of daily reading instruction, prioritized over other subjects, because reading is the fundamental skill upon which all formal education depends. When students are provided structured literacy instruction, over time, S75 will greatly reduce the need for remediation and also reduce the need for special education services. S75 will lead schools to identify students who have not made grade level progress on the components of language instruction. For students who come to school with limited vocabulary and background knowledge, this instruction is the difference between success and failure at school. Many children from low-income families, children of color, and ELL students, English language students, depend on this direct instruction to master standard English. S75 will also identify often overlooked dyslexic students, those who have strong oral language skills, who compensate in the lower grades, but then struggle to read in 3rd or 4th grade when the amount and complexity of text increase. S75 screens all children in the fall of kindergarten, 1st grade, catching them before they fail. Any student in the spring of grades K through 3 who doesn't meet grade level literacy standards will be assessed again and provided the evidence-based instruction needed to advance learning during class and through interventions. S75 also provides screening for all students K through 12 who exhibit the markers of dyslexia. Think of all the middle and high school students who struggle now due to limited vocabulary and poor spelling, poor fluency, and poor comprehension. S75 opens the door to evidence-based instruction they need to progress in literacy and be best prepared to join Vermont's workforce, especially in much needed areas that require strong literacy skills, such as in healthcare and technology. We know the detrimental lifelong consequences of low literacy on individuals, on their families, on our state and our country. S75 can give our students what they need now. The bill stipulates that schools send annual notification about K3 screenings and the opportunities for parents and others to request a screening in any grade. Schools also notify parents when their children are in need of evidence-based instruction and interventions. Schools will provide information and resources about the markers of dyslexia. In this way, they can partner together to advance students' literacy levels. In K2, parents and schools can make the most of these critical years of language development. In all grades, parents can learn about the evidence-based methods their children will receive. In closing, by leading and supporting the passage of S75, many more students will learn to read who otherwise would have been missed from the foundational years through high school. Research shows that 95% of students learn to read when provided evidence-based instruction. Ultimately, S75 will result in enormous cost savings, reduce the number of students in special education, increase our high school and college graduation rates, and equip Vermont youth with the 21st century literacy skills needed for success. Over the course of the coronavirus pandemic and reduced access to educational programs, the time for S75 has never been greater. The bill will make huge inroads in teaching all students to read proficiently. Thank you so much for your support of our students and our schools.
Thank you, Dr. Dorfman. It was great testimony, and thanks for your commitment. We are also as a committee working separately, you may know, on a literacy bill, and the state is planning on making a big investment in getting our teachers, our general sort of pre-K through 3rd grade teachers, trained in teaching reading and writing, and we certainly recognize the need. If I may, what's the downside to this bill? I mean, what is it? Why are we hearing some of the opposition we are hearing? What do you think is the downside?
I wouldn't call it a downside, but
Okay.
I think there is concern for a couple of reasons. One concern is that it will require teachers to change instructional practices.
Okay.
That requires significant training, as you just mentioned. And there has been controversy in the past over the best methods to use for teaching literacy, particularly to cultivate a love of learning and love of books. And in my experience, and from everything I've read, and also as a principal supervising teachers teaching reading, students love to be able to learn how to read.
Mm-hmm.
And they make those connections. It's so much more when they can have the realization for themselves of the depth of the storyline or the facts that they're learning from the text, rather than having the teacher explain it to them, which is much harder to remember, in fact. And so that is, I think, a concern that is voiced. Another concern that I've heard is that, including from Diane Ravitch, who says that schools are not the problem, poverty is the problem. And I would like to reflect to you that my father was completely dependent on the school system to provide the education he needed to go on to college and graduate school and be able to provide for his family. His father was barely literate. His parents did not speak much English. They were literally off the boat, coming from many generations of poverty, and completely entrusting the school system in the 30s to provide everything he needed so he could succeed in America that they could not provide for him either here or back in Europe. And so when I hear an attitude that children are too poor to learn, there are additional needs when students have limited oral language spoken at home, when perhaps their first language, if it's other than English, is not strong, and then they learn what they call the L2 language, which would be the adopted English language, when the first one is weak. But the type of instruction, this evidence-based instruction, is the same. Some students need it 1 to 4 times. That's a student who doesn't have dyslexia, as I mentioned. But other students need it 12 to 20 times in order to learn the same level. But this type of multisensory evidence-based instruction, there's a lot of differentiation of methods, but the methods are based on evidence that work. So, and there's a lot of research, and I'd be happy to share even more about that, but I know Brenda can too.
Committee, questions for Dr. Dorfman. Senator Perschler.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dorfman. My question is about the screening. So what does that kind of look like when if we were to require all these children to be screened? I'm assuming, you're not doing like a standardized test. So is it just like, is that part of the training that each teacher would have to be trained how to do this screening? And it's just a different assessment tool for each teacher in those grades to figure out where each child is?
So yes, teachers would need to have training. They don't necessarily have to screen their own students. Sometimes it's helpful to have a colleague or the literacy specialist or interventionist or special educator to conduct the screening. It's very, very important that the screener is conducted with fidelity. I have seen too many examples of when they have not been. Perhaps not using an evidence-based tool. For example, the evidence-based tool needs to be externally validated. DIBELS is a very good assessment, and assessments vary based on the needs. So with a high school student, if there are difficulties, you might need to use what's called the gray oral reading test, which is about fluency and comprehension. And that is a very there's a range. But I referred to this very important publication called The 4 Pillars of Reading Success, an action guide for states. And it specifically lists assessment tools to use that are excellent evidence-based screeners. It also lists tools not to use that are commercially available, widely marketed, and will not provide valid measures of what students can and can't do. But Senator Perchik, I cannot tell you how incredible it is to see the same results and then to teach children, because I have to do an Orton-Gillingham practicum, and know exactly going into it what they know and what they don't know. And when I teach them what they don't know, their faces light up. One said to me when he learned when a Y becomes an I, like a word like happiness, and he said, no one has ever taught me this before. He's 12. And that's just one. But he knew that I knew he didn't know. So I knew exactly what to teach. And that can be true of every teacher. And I've seen it taught here in Vermont in some schools.
First follow-up, is the Orton-Gillingham, is that what the Stern Center specializes in as well? Do you know?
Yes. Yes, they use a number of programs, but the Orton-Gillingham is an approach And there are programs that you can use that support Orton Gillingham, but Orton Gillingham is a very broad approach.
Okay.
Not very broad in that it's a big tent. It's that a teacher is required to have I have to do a full year training, 8-credit graduate course in order to teach it, get a level of certification for it. But Brenda can talk about that too.
One last question, and maybe Brenda can answer it as well, is one criticism I heard is that other educators worried of marking a child with dyslexia. You called it markers of dyslexia. In your requirement, you have to notify the parent, and that they were worried that at a very young age that this assessment might put the marker that this child has dyslexia when they don't have dyslexia or might not have dyslexia, but that's going to be a deficit for that child for the rest of their lives. What's your reaction to that?
I've personally never experienced that as a negative consequence. I can give you multiple examples, but I will leave kind of the personal on the side because there are people with dyslexia in my family, and boy, would they have liked to have known. And I, as a mother, would like to have known, so I could have provided the instruction that my child needed, particularly in that K2 time where they can learn so fast, 1 to 4 times or okay, maybe double that, but not 25 times or 30 times when they're 18 years old and they can't get a decent score on the SAT and they don't get accommodations on a test where they really need it. So that's one thing I would like to say. But another is, who is dyslexic? We were very intentional about choosing the term markers of dyslexia rather than a dyslexic child, because the markers are a range, and you don't necessarily check off every box, but we can agree that all students who have reading difficulties are entitled to evidence-based instruction that will address the difficulties and turn them into strengths on grade level and above. So it's less, so you don't have to say to a student, oh, you're a dyslexic, or to a parent, but the markers of dyslexia, and this is what we're doing, and perhaps this is what you could do at home. Not that they're doing the job of teaching, but there's reinforcement activities that can be done at home. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
Other questions? Senator Hooker, please.
Yeah, thank you. And it sort of follows, I think, along what Senator Perchlik was talking about. I think one of the things that we heard was that all kids need to sort of be screened for reading abilities. And so I'm wondering what the screening for dyslexia markers, how it's different from other screening, or is it something that, a screening for reading deficits would show, and then, you carry on from there as far as putting or channeling kids into the types of remediation or support that they need.
Brenda, I'm going to let you take this one since you've done it much more than I have. I'm still a student.
Right. Any other immediate questions for Dr. Dorfman before we shift? Ms. Peters. Okay, great. Ms. Peters, thanks for joining us. It looks like you're over in New Hampshire.
I am.
We welcome our neighbors to the east.
Excellent. Thank you.
Everything you hear about Vermonters is true, warm and friendly.
Well, that's awesome.
So it's great to have you here. If you want to jump right in and answer that question and then introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure. So what you probably will want to look at, and that this bill, I think this act proposes, is a universal screener for all children. And then that percent of children who are at risk, you'll be able to tell who they are. And those are the children you can start to design programming for. And based on some of those measures, you may want to do some additional probes. But the probes aren't necessarily standardized testing. They're things that the teacher can do to guide her instruction, his or her instruction. So generally, you're going to start with a general reading screener, and they have them from preschool all the way up to, to high school. And you would do those. We typically do them 3 times a year in most school systems, but your screener you would do at the beginning of the year and then later if it were warranted.
Okay. And can I ask another question, please?
Sure.
And I guess this goes back to Dr. Dorfman. You said greatly reduce the need for remediation over time. And I guess either of you could answer this. Is there data that you can show us that other states that have provided the type of screening that you're talking about will be able to let us know exactly, how long, or exactly, I'm sure it's student specific, but what's the general timeline that you've seen remediation, sort of fading off or not being quite as necessary? How long does it take? And I'm specifically thinking about if you start in kindergarten.
Right. If you start in kindergarten, then you have a great program in place. So you're using structured literacy with all the students because they all benefit from it. And you're doing great programming like phonemic awareness and developing, because we know those are key skills that children need to have. And you're doing that in kindergarten, first, second, third. You may be able to almost eliminate the number of students who are referred to special education. We do know that those children who don't get those services and who are at risk, by the time they get to 3rd grade, it will take 4 times longer for them to get the remediation that they need. So it takes longer and it becomes more costly.
Thank you.
Senator Lyons, please.
Thank you. And thank you for all the information. I just am asking if there's any history of any screening for dyslexia in our state and any services that may have been provided either by individual district or more broadly. Because I do know there are a lot of kids who have been identified as dyslexic, but has that been part of a screening program? And are there services that have been in place in specific areas of the state?
I can mention 2 schools I'm aware of. In the town of Williamstown, in Williamstown Elementary School, they have screeners in place. All of the teachers have been trained through the Stern Center in Orton Gillingham. And so regular screening and progress monitoring and providing evidence-based literacy instruction is what they do. And I don't know if you are aware, but after this meeting, I can email you the data, which I have tracked closely in Williamstown because I once worked there and lived not too far away, and have just been amazed by them having gone from the 3rd lowest performing elementary school in the state to really very high percentages of that. It's parents sending their child to school there can feel very confident that their child will learn how to read.
Dr. Dorfman, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to stay on this for one moment. So we've heard this before about Williamstown, and you're saying
and Randolph.
And Randolph,
yeah.
Because again, we are hopefully going to make a very large investment in, again, getting teachers trained to teach reading. And you're telling us again that Williamstown did this through the Stern Center, and over a period of time, indeed, saw an increase in literacy rates. The number that we keep sort of focusing on, whether accurate, whether it's the right age group or not, is 3rd grade. And would you mind sharing any data you have on that with our committee assistant, Jeannie Lowell? That would be great, and she'll share it with us. The
other school that I don't want to be forgotten is the Brattleboro School District, because their reading coach is he is responsible for training all of their elementary teachers K-6, and he was one of my professors at the Reading Institute. And when I showed him the scores of a student I'm working with, he said, we don't have anything that looks like this in our district except for a very disabled student who's eligible for special education, but no gen ed students have these problems. They all know these spelling patterns. They all can read these nonsense words because they all know their syllable types.
Thank you.
So
Sorry.
can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, and I'm sorry
Yeah.
to have interrupted.
No, you're fine. Because I was going there to Williamstown and Randolph. But so given that it was a Stern Center that worked with these folks, and we heard from them about in our literacy conversation, are we, I don't like killing birds, but are we killing two birds with one stone if we put in place a literacy program such as the one that was in place in Williamstown and in Randolph?
I don't understand when you say, well, we're killing two birds with one stone.
Dyslexia and then improving our literacy scores overall. So it's not just dyslexic children who improved in Williamstown, although it sounds like they did radically improve. So I'm treating the literacy side for those kids differently from the dyslexic children. But if we have a comprehensive literacy program in place, then does that solve the problem that you're talking about?
So it's essential that there are screening tools, that there are evidence-based assessments in place. So think of it as there's the screening and the assessment, there's the structured literacy instruction, and evidence-based, and then the teacher training. If you're talking about putting all those three things together, it's heaven on earth.
That's exactly what I was talking about. So thank you.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Senator Lyons. Other questions for either Ms. Peters or Dr. Dorfman? Ms. Peters, anything else? I mean, that you want to convey to the committee? And I guess one question I might have or do have is, was there a before and after in New Hampshire when this happened? In other words, was New Hampshire a state that this there wasn't screening for dyslexia, and then what happened? When did this?
And now there is. And now there is.
Witness?
Right, and I'll talk about this in my talk, but we did see a number of effects. This came into place in 2016 in New Hampshire. It's an act similar to this act that requires screening for children in K and 1. And they also contracted someone at the state, a reading specialist, who put together modules for teachers on understanding what is dyslexia, which helped in understanding that. And they also, it provided a mechanism for parents to get support for their children when needed. And it also provided an ineptus or a move for more teachers to become trained in structured literacy. We've seen an uptick in interest in teachers as they see that it can be effectively implemented with all students with great results. So yeah. COVID though has been very hard.
Sure. As you're reviewing files and things, and even you may even have them at your fingertips, any data that you might that you think is relevant to this conversation that would help us in our decision-making process, please feel free to send it along to Jeannie Lowell, our committee assistant, and she'll get it to us.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Dr. Dorfman.
Brenda Peters also prepared to present to talk about the initiative underway in New Hampshire. Is that all right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, should I start?
Please.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, Senators. My name is Brenda Peters, and I am the president of the New Hampshire International Dyslexia Association, serving Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, all three. Since its inception 18 years ago, our 15-member volunteer board has worked tirelessly to ensure all children have access to evidence-based instructional methods, referred to here as structured literacy, thereby improving lifespan outcomes. We know that poor reading correlates with low educational attainment, mental health difficulties, unemployment, underemployment, unstable housing, intergenerational transmission of low reading, exposure to violence, and even reduced life expectancy. By teaching all students to read, reading failure is prevented and poor life outcomes are avoided. I would like to share another important discovery. In my career as a reading teacher and trainer, I have found no greater motivation for a child to learn than learning to read. And likewise, I have also found no greater motivation for teachers than seeing their children become readers. As an organization, NHIDA supports S75, an act relating to the screening of for dyslexia. It is an important imperative step in identifying children in grades kindergarten through 3 who are at risk for markers of dyslexia and meeting their needs before it's too late. We know that with early intervention, evidence-based instruction, and delivery with fidelity, nearly all children will successfully learn to read. The best solution to the problem of reading failure is to allocate resources for early identification and prevention, which this act seeks to do. From the 1920s to 1948, neuropsychiatrist and pathologist Samuel Orton pioneered the study of reading failure and related language-based difficulties. Dr. Orton correctly posited that dyslexia was due to a brain-based difference, not related to intelligence. Together with psychologist and teacher Anna Gillingham, they developed a structured, systematic, multisensory approach for teaching reading referred to as the Orton-Gillingham approach, known today as structured literacy, a form of evidence-based instruction. Reading researcher June Leday Orton formed the Orton Society, which today is known as the International Dyslexia Association, the oldest organization dedicated to the study of reading and structured literacy. In 2012, in collaboration with the National Center for Learning Disabilities and the National Institute for Health and Human Development, the IDA led the way in defining dyslexia as dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading, comprehension, and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. This IDA definition of dyslexia is often cited in legislation throughout the United States and is quoted here in S75. As stated, dyslexia is neurobiological in origin and impacts up to 20% of the population. We know, however, only 13 to 14% of students qualify for special education services nationally. And of those that qualify, only half have been identified with specific learning disabilities. And 85% of these children are poor readers. This means that many kids who have dyslexia are not being identified. The 2019 National Assessment of Educational Progress report found that more than 60% of 4th and 8th grade students in the country, including Vermont, were not proficient at reading. Not only did the majority fail to read proficiently, NAEP found that 32% of 4th graders and 23% of 8th graders in Vermont received the lowest scores of below basic. I personally discovered IDA 16 years ago when my own son was finally diagnosed with dyslexia in the 3rd grade. The series of IDA fact sheets became an invaluable resource for me as I navigated how to get my son the instruction he needed. Since Brandon was in preschool, I knew his learning was different, but it took until 3rd grade to learn his diagnosis of dyslexia. That summer, my son attended Tufts University reading program, RAVO. We drove an hour a day each way, 5 days a week, so he could get the needed instruction. He made great gains in reading and in his self-confidence. I spent 3 hours each day reading in the library. I think I was among one of the first to read Sally Shaywitz's book, Overcoming Dyslexia, and the first chapter hooked me. I was struck by how hard it was to get a diagnosis of dyslexia. It took us 3 years, and how fortunate I was to be able to support my son. I had an advanced degree in organizational behavior and development and had worked for a leading company in management development and resource productivity prior to becoming a stay-at-home mom with my 3 children. And still, it took our family until 3rd grade to get a diagnosis. What about other families without the educational and financial wherewithal I had? What becomes of them, I wondered. I knew that getting a diagnosis and treatment shouldn't be this hard. So I became a mom on a mission that summer, a mission that has become my life's work. I became a reading specialist to help my son and others read. Unfortunately, however, what I learned in college did not prepare me to teach struggling readers. So I studied learning disabilities and learned how to write individual education plans and modifications and accommodations, but still, I did not know how to teach my son to read. I discovered the Children's Dyslexia Centers, sponsored by the 32nd degree Masons, less than a mile from the university I was attending. For 25 years, the CDC has provided free one-on-one tutoring to children in grades 1 through 12 twice a week for 2 to 3 years using structured literacy in their 43 centers in the Northeast. In addition, they train and certify dyslexia practitioners in their 14-month training and practicum at no charge. In 2010, the CDC actually had a center in Burlington, Vermont, which has closed for financial reasons. While getting my structured literacy certifications at the center in Nashua, I had the privilege of working 10 years as a case manager providing evidence-based reading instruction in public schools. I also became a specialist in the assessment of dyslexia. Then 7 years ago, I became the director of the CDC Seacoast Learning Center in Rochester, New Hampshire, now in its 17th year. For the past 6 years, our center has provided our dyslexia certification training and practicum to area schools. In the Rochester School District alone, which has 4,200 students, we have trained and certified 45 dyslexia practitioners, including administrators, reading specialists, case managers, English teachers, and educational technicians, with significant impact on student and teacher outcomes. We know that struggling readers who participate in a year of one-on-one tutoring twice a week often achieve grade level proficiency. We also see improvement on evidence-based screeners like the Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills, or DIBELS. In 2016, NHIDA supported and helped pass the New Hampshire House Bill 1644, a very similar act requiring dyslexia screening with evidence-based instruction when needed. Overall, the act has increased dyslexia awareness in the state. We now have a dyslexia handbook for teachers and parents. The New Hampshire Department of Education contracts with a reading specialist who created training modules for teachers on the markers of dyslexia. There has been an increased demand for structured literacy instruction from parents. And finally, parents of children with markers of dyslexia have the support of the Act to back them in getting their children needed services. IDA defines structured literacy as an
Ms.
approach
Peters,
that includes.
I'm sorry to
Yes.
interrupt. I'm going to have to ask you to try to conclude soon. We just
Okay.
have some witnesses in the waiting room and we're running a little late.
Absolutely.
We can always have you back. Thank you.
Absolutely. So structured literacy includes two things, content and methods. And you have that in my piece. What's most important about the content is that, and I'll just go off topic now and you can read what I have. What's most important is we believe that the people in the training need to have direct experience and have to have a guided, coached practicum. It's one thing to teach them the classroom material and the background information they need, but it's critical for them to have a practicum where they can learn these practices and become skilled technicians, because it really takes a great deal of practice and knowledge. So if you can build that system within your schools, it will be a very powerful tool. These are comments from different teachers who have gone through the training and how it impacted their life. Most times teachers who get this training, it is life-changing, because sometimes, often for the first time in their life, they know how and are confident in teaching children to read. And then for children, there is no greater motivator for a child than learning that they can learn to read. This is, and I see this all the time. It is so empowering when children finally get a method that works and they start to read. It's a powerful tool, a powerful experience. So thank you for letting me share.
Committee, questions? You both have been incredibly helpful to us and hope you'll stay in touch as we make our way through this work. And I think we will leave it there. We do hope to hear from Williamstown Elementary School, possibly tomorrow, and any other data or information you believe is critical to our crafting of this bill, please forward it along to Ms. Lowell. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, you too. Committee, why don't we just take a 5-minute stretch before we jump in, and we will come back and get started at